Everybody. So I'm Jonathan Manning. My experience for this class comes from really managing a nursery. I manage a big nursery on the west side of Phoenix, and it's about 35 acres. It's all run with the exact same timers that you use at home. So they're a little bit bigger, more stations, more programs sometimes, but the functions are all the same. All timers really have about the same functions. I've been doing that for 25 years. So I've come across some tricks and some problems, lots of problems, and solved most of them over the years. So, like I say, I'm going to share as much of that experience as I can. I've also done a lot of residential help, going to people's timers, sometimes finding newer timers like I'm used to working with, and sometimes finding timers that are so ancient I got to take a while to figure out how to work them. That's the problem with timers, is that they all do the same thing. They all have about the same 3 or 4 functions. The problem is every single timer has a different button, switch, toggle, dial, everything. The way you put the information in is different. So I'm going to try the best to talk about the basics of irrigation, and then get into what type of program you would want to put into your timer, and then a little bit about how to put it into the most common couple brands of timer. And there's some information about where you would get more information for specifics on the details of programming different brands of timer, because that is the hardest problem. So the real basics of irrigation we can jump right into. My email there is on the slide. If anyone ever wanted to email me pictures, questions, all that, I'm always available for that, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And let's see here, the basic tips for watering in the Southwest, because it is different all over the country. Actually just got back from Washington State today, and irrigation is a whole different game up there. So we're going to talk about how to irrigate plants with automatic timers in the desert Southwest specifically. The biggest question that I get at the nursery is, am I watering too much or not enough? And unfortunately, it's usually a fatal decision when they decide to go with one or the other. Normally, I think people think maybe it's too much water, I'll stop watering for a while, and then everything dies. Too much water is the least common problem here in the desert. It happens, it can happen, and we'll go over some slides about what the symptoms of that would be, but it's very much less common than not enough water. And it's also simpler, and that's why I'm going to start with it. It's very simple to know if you're watering too much. It's if the ground never dries out, the surface of the soil never dries out. Between waterings, you can't overwater something all in one day. You could water anything in your yard for 24 hours straight and it wouldn't hurt it a bit, as long as it dries out before you do that again. So that's the key. If the soil never dries out, maybe it's too much water. But if the soil is drying out between waterings, I would eliminate the option of being too much water. And then we'll talk much more about not enough water, but it's pretty simple. You want the soil to dry out between waterings. And that is also the simplest way to regulate the frequency of your watering. And when we talk about programming the timer, the thing that you change all year long is the frequency of irrigation. So how often do you water? That's the thing that all year round, when it's hotter, colder, more humid, less humid, you change that throughout the year, right? So a really good guide to if I'm watering too much or not enough, not often enough or too often enough, would be if the soil does not dry out between waterings, you need to spread that cycle a little further apart. So the frequency of watering should be less frequently if the soil doesn't dry out before it's about to start again. So you can also use that trick about looking at the soil and seeing if it's wet or not. You can use it to regulate your frequency of irrigation on your timer also. So pay attention to the soil. Our yards are full of gravel, most of us, and you can kick it aside with your shoe and maybe dig a little hole. You might need a little trowel, hand trowel, and just dig a little hole an inch deep or so. And if it's dry down there, then you know 2 things. You're not watering too much. And then you also know that you could irrigate again if you wanted to, if those plants look like they might need water. So that's as much as I'm going to say about those rules with too much water, not enough water. The next couple slides are about too much water here. One thing that too much water does cause is root rot. So not all plants get root rot. Some do, some don't. The ones that do look like that picture, that's a dwarf myrtle in the picture there, and that dwarf myrtle would look just like that if it died of not enough water. So either way, you can't really tell what happened to it by the top. It's dead. But I looked, handful of soil, it's sopping wet. Now I know that it died of too much water. If the soil was bone dry, then I would suspect more likely it died of not enough water. So again, the soil tells you if it's too much water, not enough, more than the plant itself. So those plants that are susceptible to root rot would die very quickly. They're beautiful one day, 2-3 days later, dead. All the leaves still stuck on them, and usually green at first, but dried out, and then they finally turn brown and die. But it's very fast. Root rot kills in maybe a week, 2 weeks, and there's no coming back from it. And that's from the soil never drying out. The next one is if you see moss. If you can see moss on the surface of the soil there, it means it hasn't dried out for a really long time. One day of drying out and that moss would shrivel up and die. And so it's a good sign. It doesn't happen very often here, but on the north side of the house, where you're watering too often, too frequently, it can grow, especially in the winter time. North side of the house in the winter, when the sun doesn't ever really shine there directly, it's real easy to see moss grow where you're watering too often. So that's another sign. The too much water. I followed that water in the gutter about 3 blocks away. So it was a matter of a water cycle, a run time, much too long for what would absorb into the ground for that lawn. So it's been running so long that it runs down the sidewalk into the gutter and far away. So that's just pure wasting water. The plant's fine. There's no symptoms in the lawn whatsoever. It looks wonderful. It's a good sign that you're watering too much, wasting water. Another one kind of similar is this next slide, and this is more a problem of the hardware. So the sprinkler heads are putting water much too far. The gravel that's dark brown there is all getting wet every time it waters. So now again, you're wasting water. It's not going to where you want it to go. The way we save water, you'll hear in most of my presentations, I talk about watering more and more, but it's putting the water where the roots of the plant can get it. And the way you waste water is by putting it out there in places or depths that the roots can't reach it anymore. So all that water that's out in the gravel is doing nothing but getting wasted, and it also grows weeds. So now you're putting herbicide out there to kill the weeds and wasting water. So a little bit of adjustment on the sprinkler heads, and maybe adjusting the run time so it doesn't run off. That would be a good way to save water in this situation. So again, too much water, no effect on the lawn itself, but just more ways to waste water. So that's all I'm going to say about too much water. Not enough water is a whole, it's much more common of a problem, and it's also more complex in the ways that you cannot be given enough water. So the one thing I really like to tell people, because some people they calculate the output of their system, right? Their drip system, each drip emitter has so many gallons per hour, and then they run it for a certain amount of time. And you can use math to figure out a good amount of water, gallons of water to give each plant. The problem with it, I think, is that every soil takes water differently, and we'll talk about that later. Every kind of type of plant needs a different frequency of watering and different depths of watering. So you can do all the math you want, but if the plant in your yard is telling you that it's dry, that's all that matters. So I prefer to use the method of two things. If I want to ride the line of watering efficiency, I make sure the soil dries out between waterings. That's the first step. That way I know I'm not watering too much. And the next step is watch the plants for signs of drought. And these next slides are going to be ways that you can look for those signs of drought in your plants, because in the end, I don't care how many gallons of water that some chart says that this plant should need. If the plant says it's dry, that's what matters in the end. So I like to use those two factors better to be very efficient in the water that I put out there. If the soil dries out between waterings and the plants are not showing any signs of drought, then you're good. It's as easy as that when you do it that way. So okay, so let's get into some symptoms of drought. The symptoms here, I think the one on the right, these are citrus trees in pots, which they dry out a lot faster in pots than they would in the ground. But I've seen citrus trees like the one on the right in the ground wilt. So wilted plants like that, big leaf plants especially, wilt very easily. It's when the water there's no water in the roots, and the hot dry air has evaporated all the water out of the leaves, and now they're not perky at all. So you'd feel them, they'd feel like wilted lettuce, really soft and saggy. That's wilt. If you watered today, it would perk back up, grow like normal. It's still not, if you watered today or tomorrow, it wouldn't be a death sentence. It would just perk back up and start growing. And then it would look like this one on the left. The one on the left is perfect. There's perky leaves all over the tips, and there's also a lot of leaves in the middle of the plant. And those leaves in the middle of the plant is what we're going to talk about next. So the tree in the middle, the tree in the middle of the three, this has a subtle sign of drought that most people don't notice. The one on the right is wilted and it's obvious. The one in the middle has dried out and then came back, and dried out and came back over the period of weeks, maybe months. And what plants do, leafy plants, when that happens over and over and over again, if a plant doesn't have enough water to support every leaf on it, it naturally drops the oldest leaves that it has. It's a defense mechanism. So if there's not enough water for all the leaves, the oldest, least useful leaves fall out, and they're the ones in the middle. So if you looked in the pot there's little yellow leaves that have just fallen off. They turn yellow gradually over a week or two, and they fall out. And then you get this plant that's like bald in the middle and green on the tips. The tips are green and perky, but there's no leaves in the middle. And that's a sign that you aren't watering quite often enough, or maybe not deep enough, or for some way you're not giving it enough water to support all the leaves that it owns. And there's a couple more examples here that maybe make a little more sense. So hibiscus, another one that needs quite a bit of water. The one on the right, all the leaves are getting plenty of water. None of them have decided to fall off. They're nice and full and green. The one on the left, those leaves, if you touch the few leaves that are left, they would be perky. It's not wilted. Remember, that's a whole separate sign. A wilt is definitely needs water now. This hasn't had enough water over the last couple of weeks or months. And those old leaves, the reason the old leaves are least useful is because they're in the shade of the other leaves, right? All the other leaves are shading those a little bit. So they're the oldest, they're getting the least amount of sun. And if the plant has to drop some leaves to compensate for lack of water, they drop them out of the middle. So the one on the left obviously has done that. Same thing. You get the bald. Palms do the same thing. If you think about it, where's the new leaf on a palm? It comes out the middle, right? The very middle, protected by all the other ones, the new leaf comes out. That one's going to be the last one to go. So the old leaves naturally turn yellow and then brown. That's natural on palms. But if it's not getting enough water, those yellow and brown leaves keep getting higher and higher and higher up on the trunk until almost all the leaves are yellow and brown. So again, it's the same thing. If you think about it, the oldest leaves, the ones on the bottom, are prematurely turning yellow and dying. Same thing. Even cactus can show signs of drought. In the case of cactus, I would almost wait for this to happen, because too much water in a cactus is a death sentence. They turn mushy black, rot, stink at the base of the plant, right where it goes into the ground. Usually they fall over, or in the case of a barrel cactus or something, you could push it over with a shovel and it would just be a stinky, rotted mess at the ground from too much water. If it got to the point of this one, you can see it's shriveled a little bit. The tissue in the cactus is shriveled up, and that's okay. That's what they're made to do. Cactus are made to get that dry, and then you water real good. When you water, remember, you can't overwater anything in one day. You could give it as much water as you want. I would deep soak it with the hose, drip it with the hose for 2-3 hours, and then not again for 2 weeks in the summer or more, maybe a month, once a month in the winter. And about a week or two after you deep soak it like that, it puffs right back up fat, grows really good for a while, and then gradually goes back to a little bit of shrivel. So don't worry about that in this, but it is a sign of drought. Same thing, they tell you what they want. And in the case of cactus, like I say, if you want to save some water, Another way to do it is to, if you have hibiscus and cactus on the same drip system, I would put caps on the emitters for the cactus and water them with the hose. If you could at all manage watering once a month in the winter and once every 2 weeks in the summer with the hose, I would be healthier to do that and save a ton of water instead of having the drip system pump way too much water onto your cactus because it's trying to keep the hibiscus alive on the same cycle. So it just to save a lot of water. If you have a lot of cactus or even just one in the landscape, I would cap those emitters and water it with the hose. And I can't pass up the opportunity to talk a little more about cactus because it's one of my favorite plants. I think this next slide here, I just had to put in. It's one of my favorites. They're called Trichocereus, but the more common name is probably torch cactus. But you can get them in any color of the rainbow: yellow, orange, pink, white, everything. And breeders are working more and more, just like breeders do with roses or anything else. They find new hybrids, new varieties all the time. It's a really good item that you could collect and have lots. A lot of those flowers are the size of a, coffee cup saucer or whatever, 3-4 inches in diameter. And just beautiful cactus that handle as hot as it gets here. And they also handle as cold as it gets here, because a lot of cactus, they do freeze in the winter. So these are just kind of bulletproof, easy, and really beautiful to have in the yard. Out in the full sun is fine. But anyway, like I say, couldn't pass up the chance to slip that pitch in there. Back to not enough water. Which wouldn't be a problem for that cactus, but for a lot of things it would. If you're seeing those signs of drought, remember, you're looking for the plants to tell you that they're not getting quite enough water. Well, what would that be? You made sure that it's not too much water, because the ground does dry out between waterings, and you're pretty sure it's not enough water now. There's 3 ways to not water enough, not just one. There's 3 ways to not water enough. 2 of them have to do with the timer, so I'm going to talk more about them in this class. So there's the 3 ways that you could not be watering enough. The first one, what do you think of? It's the frequency, the third one on this list. Frequency is what everybody thinks of. I ask people all the time, people bring in plants that I'm positive weren't getting enough water to the nursery. And I mentioned maybe they're not getting enough water. And the first thing they say is, it can't be not enough water. I water every day. But it's because I got to believe they're out there squirting it off for 3 or 4 minutes every day and never soaking the water in very deep and never letting it puddle up very wide. So frequency is tricky. It seems everyone thinks of frequency. And so that's the last one. And that's purely a timer problem. If you're not watering frequently enough, it's a timer problem. We'll talk a lot about it. But these first 2 are people as much. So underground, roots are all within the first 3 feet of soil, and all that whole 3 feet of soil for a tree or shrub has to get water, or else not getting that water. If you water for maybe the depth is controlled by the run time on your timer. It says that there on number 1. So the depth of the water is completely dependent on how long you water for. It's your run time, and we'll talk about that when we program too. The run time is how long this irrigation system stays on for. Could be 24 hours, could be 1 hour, could be 15 minutes. And the longer it runs for, the deeper it soaks in. It's very simple and always straightforward like that. There's no tricks to it. The longer you run the water for, the deeper it's going to soak in. The general rule for plant trees and shrubs is about 3 feet. That's where all the roots are. And when you put water 3 feet deep in the desert, it's cool down there. It's cool down there, and that water that's 3 feet deep is protected from evaporation. If you water for 15 minutes, it's probably only soaking in 1 inch or 2, and that water is susceptible to evaporation, right? Goes in the soil and comes right back out. When the roots 3 feet down may never even have gotten a drop of it. So there's a way to waste water also. Another way to save water, put the water down deep where only the roots can get it and the dry air can't just evaporate it away. So the depth of watering is very important, and it's completely dependent on one part of programming the timer that we're going to talk a lot about, run time. The second, with the number 2, the area of the wet spot when you water. This I'm not going to talk about as much, but unfortunately it's probably one of the most common reasons I see plants not getting enough water. This is talking about the drip emitters, right? It's the hardware, the plumbing of your system. And if you, unfortunately, many landscapers here in the valley use 1 gallon per hour drip emitters or 2 gallon per hour drip emitters. It's just not very many gallons of water for a older big plant to live on between irrigation cycles. So the general rule on this is that the whole area under the plant should get wet when it waters. The whole area. It's hard with drip emitters. It needs a whole lot of little drip emitters that are making a little tiny wet spot to wet the whole area under a big tree. But that's really the way that it needs to be done. The best thing you could do for that is maybe on a bigger tree, you put a big soaker hose underneath it in a circle about out to the edge of the drip line. That's where the roots absorb water, is out toward the edge of the branches above the edge of the branches above ground is where the edges of the roots are going to be underground. That's where they absorb the water the best. And that's another problem, is the drip emitters a lot of times are still right there at the trunk, and they need to be moved out a little bit, and then lots more drip emitters added as the time goes on and the plants get bigger and bigger. So that's a whole other class. That's irrigation maintenance and repair type class more. And I won't talk much more about it for this one because we're talking about programming, and I don't care if your program is perfectly set, it won't solve the problem of having not enough drip emitters out there to your plants. So investigate that in another way. Or ask questions about it for that matter. But in this course, I'm going to stick with the depth of watering and the frequency of watering, because both of those things are directly related to what's programmed into your timer. Let's go a little more detail into each of those things. How deep should the water soak in? So the depth for little flowers, right? There's 6 packs of flowers, petunias, vinca, all that, and vegetable gardens, tomatoes, peppers, all that, and lawns, it would only be about 1 foot deep. The root system is just not big enough to reach 3 feet deep. So those things, your run time can be shorter. On a lawn, you'll notice a lot of people only water lawns for 15, 20 minutes. And that's because the root system is much shorter and the water doesn't have to soak in as deep. But trees and shrubs, they say shrubs are 2 feet and trees are 3 feet. Any shrub I know that'll grow in the desert can reach water 3 feet deep. So I like to make it simple, just 3 feet deep for trees and shrubs, 1 feet deep for little flowers, vegetables, and lawn. And the only way, or I'm sorry, the 3 types of soil, or there's more than 3, everybody has different soil in their yard. And that's the biggest reason why I can't say, and there is recommendations, and it's okay to follow them to start, about how long to water for, what run time. I'd say the average in Phoenix is 2 hours. If you want a starting point, 2 hours of a run time for trees and shrubs on drip. And that would be a guess because everybody's soil is different. And I really want to talk about this slide here. The one on the right would be really heavy, dense clay soil, which there is lots of in our valley. And even our regular sandy loam clay loam soil that we have in the flat part of the valley, if you were to get it wet and drive over it 1,000,000 times with a backhoe like they do to build a house, it's going to compact it so much, press it down so much that water won't go through it anymore. So not easily anyway. So that's one extreme case. And in that case, the runtime needs to be very, very long because it's going to take a long time to gradually soak in. But your frequency is going to be very infrequently, because once you soak that water in 3 feet deep to that clay, it's going to stay wet for a long time. So everything's different just because it's clay soil, compacted clay soil especially. Your runtime is going to be super long, and your frequency is going to be maybe every 2 weeks. So 4-hour runtime, I would guess, and you're only going to water every 2-3 weeks. So let's go to the opposite end, the left-hand slide with its sand, gravelly sand, which a lot of parts of town are too. And those are usually in the edges of town, Vistancia, Verrado, Estrella Park, where it's hilly. If the neighborhood you live in used to be a desert, a hilly desert, chances are they've scraped off the tops of mountains and threw them in the valleys to make it all flat. And now you got parts of your yard that might be really gravelly, sandy. And in that case, it's the exact opposite. Your run time's gonna be very short, maybe half an hour would soak it into 3 feet deep right away, right straight to 3 feet deep. But as fast as that water goes in, it evaporates back out at the same time. So your run time is going to be 2-3 times a week, maybe. So from half an hour 3 times a week to 4 hours every 3 weeks, a big difference. And that's why the charts don't always work for everybody's yard. It's about the soil is the biggest difference on why we got to program our timers differently. And that's something that you might have to diagnose. I mean, I've worked in yards in Paradise Valley where you could put a hose full blast on the ground and it just dives in, like disappears into the gravel. I don't know where it comes out, down the hill somewhere in somebody else's backyard probably. But there's extreme cases of these soil conditions that have to be managed. But that's more or less the extremes and how you would deal with them with your timer. All right, next here. How do you know it's getting that deep? Again, the easiest way is to watch your plants. If you notice signs of drought, and you know that you're watering frequently enough, and you know that the whole area under the plant's getting wet when you water, I would suspect that you might not be watering deep enough. It's something like that. You can always put a drip emitter off to the side a little bit, let it run for its full cycle, and go digging a hole. And you can dig a hole. You could just stick with the wet part, and as you're digging the wet part out, you'll find the wet spot that one drip emitter made. And that's a labor-intensive way to do it, but you can. There's another way in valley soil, the flat part of the valley that's clay. A soil probe works really good, and it's like a 1/4-inch rod. You can get a 3-foot long 1/4-inch metal rod at any hardware store. You can, what you do is you water like you think you need to, right when the timer goes off and there's still standing water, you slide that probe through the sloppy mud. This is the kind of soil that sticks to your shoes when it's wet. And it works on that soil, you slide it in, and the second you start to feel resistance, you stop, pull it back out and see how far it went in, and that's how deep you're watering. It's probably the easiest way to check how deep your watering is going, but it doesn't work in gravel soil. It doesn't work in rocky, sandy soil as much. So if you do have flat valley soil anywhere in the flat part of the valley, it'd probably work pretty good to have one of those probes, and then you can go checking it that way. So investigate that and kind of make sure that your plants are getting water deep enough. The depth is what we've been talking about. The area, just remember the whole area under the plant should be wet. Most of the time when I find plants that aren't getting enough water, I check the timer. The timer is set perfectly. The run time's perfect. The frequency is perfect for that time of year. And then the plants are still dying. And I go out there and scrape away a little bit of gravel, and I find a itty bitty tiny little wet spot this big that I don't care if it's soaking into China. It's not enough area that's wet for all those roots to get water when it waters. So remember the area, the number 2 way, and that's the last I'll talk about it, because it's not a timer problem. Remember, it's a drip emitter problem. And in that case, you would add drip emitters, and you might increase the ones you have to a higher flow, 5 gallons per hour, 10 gallons per hour, and then add a few more, and then that solves that problem. So back to frequency. The most obvious of ways to not be watering enough, the one most people think of when they think of I might not be watering enough, they're thinking of not often enough. And so this chart that's on the slide there is a very good way to start. This is one of those charts that you can find at most municipalities. Most water services department have them. Most libraries have literature with it in it. Online everywhere you can get these charts if you were to just Google how often do I water in Phoenix or whatever. So Water Use It Wisely is the organization that puts it out, and it's a very good organization. What I do like to point out, though, is there's a little fine print at the bottom there, and it says these guidelines are for established plants, right? The frequency they give you here is for plants that have been in the ground long enough to be strong, have a big root system, deep root system that can absorb water that you soak in real deep and don't water as often. So these frequencies you might notice seem like they're for, a desert adapted tree that could go, if you desert adapted tree, you follow the chart across to winter every 60 days. It is possible. A mesquite that's 5-6 years old would go 60 days without irrigation, no problem at all in the winter. But remember, it's if it's established. You can't start that way. The frequency needs to be more frequently when you first start, when the plants are babies and they don't have their roots down deep. You do soak the water in deep from the very first day you plant that plant. Why? It's because the roots follow that water down. Even though there's no roots 3 feet deep when you first put in a 5-gallon, if you put the water down there, so that's your run time. You start right off the bat with a longer run time to soak that water in deep. But the frequency does change with the age of the plant. The younger the plant, the more frequently you water, and the older the landscape, the less frequently you should water. Save a lot of water that way. So what changes the frequency, because this is, remember, the only thing I change on my timer throughout the year is the frequency. Then once I get the run time right, I leave it for all year round. The water soaks into the ground the same way in winter as it does in the summer. So once I get that figured out, it's done. And the drip emitters out there, once I get the whole area under the plant wet, I can leave that too. What I do change is the frequency, and that's with all these factors, it should be changed. So obviously temperature, but wind dries out plants faster than anything. If the air is low humidity and windy, is going to be the most you water throughout the year, and we'll talk about the wind. But soil type we talked about, right? That everything changes with the type of soil you have as far as how often you water. The plant type, hibiscus, for example, I don't mean to keep using that one, but it uses a lot of water, and it need water more often than the cactus would. So the plant type matters too. A plant size, I would say age is a better word. The age of the plant, how big it is, determines how often it needs water. The bigger they are, the less often they need water. The more gallons of water they need when they get water, but the longer they can go without it. So microclimate means if you had a little entryway, or if your yard, for example, is very, very thick with vegetation, big trees everywhere, shaded, you've created a microclimate in your yard that's going to need water less often. So, it blocks the wind that we talked about, dries plants out. It blocks the sun that dries plants out. So the understory of a nice, well-shaded yard from trees is going to need less water, or water less often. How about that? Maintenance is because if you like the manicured look that's hedged, shrubs that are sheared, they're going to need more water. They do. They just do. When a plant naturally grows in the desert, in the spring, when the weather's good, they put on new growth. That new growth hardens off and stops losing so much water for when it gets hot, they're ready for it. When you shear that off, it looks beautiful because all those new shoots come back, beautiful new little shoots. And as if you've ever sheared anything, you got to do it over and over and over and over again to keep it looking nice. So what have you done? You've created a year-round tender new shoot situation, and those tender new shoots really are only adapted to growing in the spring when the weather's good, and now you got to add water to them to keep them alive. It's possible, it's doable, but just so you know, you'll have to water more often if you shear plants than you would if you let them grow naturally and those leaves to harden off and be adapted to that summer heat. That's how they do it. They seal up, harden off, but they won't look as fluffy, sheared green as you do when you do that. So that's just another thing that people should know to just make good decisions about how you want to treat your landscape. Same thing more or less, but this has humidity in it. That's why I like to bring up this slide. Humidity is very, very important. And I think I'll go to the next slide to talk about why. So this chart is, if you go from the bottom where it says May, right, where the sunshine is, right there on May. If you were to go horizontally straight across, May and August have about the same water frequency. And then this is for frequency, right? How often you water plants. So why would May, that's only 90, it's in the 90s, it feels actually pretty good. It's dry and in the 80s, 90s, beautiful weather. Why would your plants need the same amount of water in May as they do in August, when we all know August, having recently survived it, is just horrible? It's because of humidity. That's the one big difference. So dry air sucks the water out of plants like crazy. The water, that's how plants work. It comes in the bottom and out the top all day. In the bottom, out the top. In the roots, out the leaves. So when that air around those leaves is dry, man, that process just works so much faster. And when there's humid air, that's why greenhouses work so good. So when there's humid air surrounding the plant, the water does not go out the leaves as fast. The whole process works, but it's much more manageable and they can hold on to water a lot longer. So remember, the only lesson here would be the most frequently you water throughout the year is going to be May and June, hot, dry winds. And and you can take a break on the water come monsoon season, right? When the monsoon season starts, which really didn't this year, but if it does, sooner or later, when the monsoon season starts and the air gets humid, you can back off the frequency. Maybe you water 1 or 2 days less often than you would in May and June. So remember that change. Most people think I'm going to change my timer for the winter and the summer, or maybe for the winter, summer, spring, and fall. But really, there's another change in there throughout the year, and that's when the monsoon starts and the humidity goes up. So remember that change too. That's all about frequency. Lawn, I haven't talked anything about, and this is the frequency is much different. So remember, you're not soaking the water in as deep for lawn because the roots aren't that deep. So you soak the water in about a foot, and it doesn't last as long. So you're watering more frequently. This chart's a good place to start. I would say the chart works pretty good for lawn in most soils, because a lot of times lawn's been built on a bed of fresh soil that's brought in anyway, or at least it's put on some type of soil normally. There still might be details, but in general, if you got dry spots in your lawn, I have checked the depth of watering in different places. I just went to a yard the other day that there were some dry spots, and it didn't look like they were humps, like it didn't look like they were higher than the rest of the lawn. But when you went with a trowel and dug down, one side of the lawn it's soaking in 2 feet, and the other side of the lawn it's soaking in 2 inches, and that's just a matter of the lawn being on a slope and all that water running down to the bottom hill. A slope so slight that you couldn't see with your eye. But by digging down, soil probing, whatever you want to do, you can also check lawn as far as the depth of the water and the frequency. The chart is probably pretty accurate. Every 15 to 30 days for winter lawn. And in the summertime, every 3 to 6 days on a Bermuda lawn in the summer. Just dries out faster. So the chart works pretty good for that, I would say. Watering schedule for remember, when a plant first goes in, it needs water almost every day. In the nursery, in the summertime, we water 5-gallon pots twice a day. So you take that home, put it in the ground, it can't go 2 weeks without water. I mean, it's still just the roots are still in that 5-gallon pot, even though you put them in the ground. You have to do what they have to get water every day for a while. Then every couple days, then every 3 or 4 days, then every week. You spread it out as you see that plant getting healthier, growing. The roots are doing the same thing underground, and the bigger that root system gets, the longer they can go between irrigations without water. And remember, the depth should be from the very first day you put it in. That run time should be long enough to soak the water in 3 feet deep for a tree or shrub, because you want those roots to follow that water to that depth. It helps establish a plant even quicker. But the frequency you got to change. The frequency has to be from very frequently on a new plant to very infrequently on an older established desert plant. Remember, lawns, when they're if you had all desert plants, and that's not just cactus, that's like mesquites, palo verdes, Texas sages for bushes, things like that. All those plants would go almost without irrigation after 5-6 years of growing really well. You could start to wean them off of irrigation and eventually be with maybe 1 or 2 deep soaks through the summer, and that's it. I mean, you could almost turn your timer to off and manually water them when you want. So that's a potential too, as landscapes get older and established. And if you're using plants that are desert adapted, if you're choosing plants for your yard, remember that it might be a reason to kind of avoid the higher use water plants and stick with the stuff that's desert adapted. Or if you got your whole yard is desert adapted and there's that one thing that wilts and you're watering the whole thing because the one plant wilts every couple days, maybe it's time for that plant maybe it's time for that plant to go. I don't know. You could convert it and make the whole thing water on a better cycle. Or to not promote the killing of plants, you could water that one plant with a hose. How about that? You water that one canary in the coal mine that tells you everything's dry, wilted way before the rest is. You water that thing with a hose if you want, something like that, and leave the irrigation cycle for those plants that need it much less often. All right, I better get to the programming of the controller. That's mainly what this class is about. I just had to get through all those basics because that's the information that we're going to put into the programmer. And without understanding what a runtime is or why you're changing the frequency throughout the year, it's just hard to do. So now that we've went over those things, I'd like to talk about the timer itself, right? So again, the problem with this is that we use a lot of these rain dial timers, but not everybody does. And each timer has a different way to put information into it. The best bet is always probably with the manufacturer. There's some phone numbers which you could get just as easy by Googling it probably, or by searching it, web searching it, I mean. And but get a hold of the people who made the timer if you're having trouble figuring out what button to push or what dial to turn or all that. I'm going to try. I got the most common two brands are come up in this presentation a lot, but if you have a brand if you don't have Hunter or Irritrol, then you'll have to probably get a little information from the manufacturer about how to put what we're talking about in, how to put a runtime in, how to put a start time in, how to put the frequency in, things like that. So one thing I'll start with, every timer has a battery in it that I've seen. I mean, yeah, every timer I've found has some sort of battery. Some is a little tiny watch battery thing that slides into a little door that's hard to find. This Irritrol has a big 9-volt battery right in the back when you open it up. Whatever it is, find it, change it once a year, I would say, is all you need to, unless you've moved into a house that you don't know how long the power's been out to, and then I would change the battery from right away, from the get-go. Why do all this programming and then realize that one little flicker of the light's going out and your whole program's lost without that battery? That's what it does. So you can also know if you open the door to your timer and the current time is flashing, that's pretty standard like notification that you've lost a program. It's like your old-fashioned alarm clocks when the power goes out and the time's wrong, they flash to let you know that. Same thing. So if you see the time flashing, first thing you do, put a new battery in it, and then go about programming all the information back into it. No sense doing it with a bad battery. So what, you might have these they're green boxes, plastic boxes underground, green. They might be round, they might be rectangles, they might be purple in some cases. They're usually green or brown, tan or green. So what's in there? That's a valve, right? That valve, water pressure, full-time water pressure goes in one side, and water comes out the other side when it opens and doesn't when it shuts. So if you think about it, I just like to simplify what your timer does. Your timer, your timer opens that valve and shuts it. That's it. That's all it does. There might be 20 of those out there and it does them all at different times maybe, but to simplify it, all your timer can do is send electricity through those two wires and open that and shut it. That's all it does, open and shut it. So what the details, the reason you have a timer instead of just you going out there and turn it on and turn it back off, the details of what the timer does for you is all these things is one program, right? So one program, and the programs, I'm going to start with this because it's hard to get to people, and I'll start the process of like introducing the concept of programs. The programs are the ABC, right? They're the letters ABC, not the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are valves. Each one of these valves out there in the yard, with the thing I was just talking about, each one of those has a number associated with it. What that might be valve 1. We're going to call that valve 1. Valve 1 might be programmed into program A. So the programs have letters A, B, C, and you don't always need them all. People get confused. You might only need one. So we're going to simplify this as that valve 1, valve number 1, is programmed onto your timer under program A, and that's all you have. Program A, if you only have one valve out there, you only need one program. Program A, valve 1, and all the timer can do is there's 3 bits of information that a program has. The start time, that's what time of day it comes on, 7 a.m., 5 p.m., whatever you want. The start time, the run time. So remember, I said all the timer can do is open that valve and shut it. The runtime is for how long. Does it open it for 5 minutes? Does it open it for 5 hours? That's a runtime. And the third and last thing that your timer does is the frequency. You put in how often do you want all that to happen. You want it to start at 5 a.m. and run for 5 hours. How often? You could do Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You could do Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. You could also use the other options that are on there that I prefer, honestly, and those are called interval, or some timers call it skip days. And that's where you say, I want the timer to skip 3 days and then water, or I want the timer to skip 30 days and then water. And we'll talk more about that a little bit, but that's all it can do. It's all the timer can do. Is the program is 3 pieces of information, and the programs have letters. So program A, you have to put in your start time, your run time, and your frequency. And then that would be program A. We're going to go through how to do that on program A. I think where people get confused is, why is there a program B, or why is there a program C? And you may have to use those. The most common scenario where you use those is if you're trying to water trees and shrubs on drip. That would be A, right? That valve, when it opens, it waters all your trees and shrubs with the drip emitters. So all that can be on A. Say you have another one of those valves out there. We'll call that one number 2, because remember, the valves have numbers associated to them. Valve number 2 is for your little tiny piece of lawn, right? So you go with your program A and your trees and shrubs on drip. You put in your start time, your run time, and then there's the frequency. And we just learned all about how trees and shrubs can go much longer without water than lawn. So how would you water your lawn more often and your trees and shrubs less often on the same program if they both have the same frequency? That's why you need program B. So the B comes up when you have certain plants that need different frequency of watering than other plants. So each group of plants that has its own frequency of watering needs to go on a different program, and those programs are A, B, and C. You might not ever use C, or you might, either way, but it gives you 3 options, 3 different programs. Each individual program gives you the opportunity to put those 3 pieces of information in: the run time, the start time, and the frequency. So that's why. I mean, if that made any sense at all. This is the hardest part. This is the hardest class I do, really, and that's the hardest thing to get to people, is what a program is and what a valve is and what are all that runtime. So if you got any of that, you're way ahead. So program, it's program A. If you only got one valve out there, all you need is program A, and that valve will do your drip system, all the trees and shrubs on drip. So let's see what the next slide is before I continue repeating myself here. The current time simple. That doesn't matter what program you're on, right? The current time is because if you're going to tell the timer to start at 5 a.m., it has to know what time it is right now. Simple as that. So for all the programs and all the valves and anything you do with the timer, it just needs to know what time it is. And that's easy to find. Usually it's on the programming part. I've talked about if it's flashing, the current time. If it's flashing, it means you've lost your program and you need to put the battery in and reprogram the thing. And so that's as simple as that. The next thing, though, here's one of those things that goes into each individual program, only the programs you're using. So I like to start with start times. Remember, 3 pieces of information: the start time, the run time, and the frequency. I like to start figuring out the start time, because it tells me when I show up to a yard and people don't know anything about their timer or what it's doing, the first thing I do is make sure the current time's right. Then I go to the start times, and I go to start times, and then I see what program I'm on. A. If I'm on program A, it'll have its own start time. Then I go to B and see what start time it has. Half the time it's nothing, it's off, or it has lines through it, like there is no start time for B, and right away I know that these people are not dealing with program B. I go to C, same thing, off, and now I can focus, man. It's just A is all I'm working on, just program A. But sometimes I check the start time on A and it's 7 a.m. and then I check the start time on program B and it's like 7 p.m. or whatever, so if there's a start time on a program, it means it's being used. And then I can go into all the other things, the run time, the frequency, all that. But if there's no start time on a program, it'll never start. Does that make sense? That should make sense. So if there's no start time on a program, B and C is usually maybe where there's no start time. You don't have to worry about, there could be run times programmed into those programs. There could be frequency programmed into those programs. None of it matters. If there's no start time, it's never going to start. so you can focus on what you need to work on. So whatever programs have a start time, those are the ones that then you got to go check the other aspects of runtime and frequency. So the other things I like to talk about start, because we're going to go through each of these start times, and then we're going to go through run times and frequency. So the last things I want to talk about on start times, and remember that's the time of day that this program, either A, B, or C, what time of day it starts. And the things I like to mention is I think a lot of people have heard that you shouldn't water your lawn in the middle of the afternoon. I agree. Most of that water out of spray heads evaporates away before it hits the ground at the middle of the day in the summer. But they tend to put them at midnight, and I don't like that. If it's going to run when you're fast asleep every single time, there's a whole lot of opportunity for sprinkler heads that got broke off by the lawnmower, or drip emitters that are squirting into your neighbor's yard or whatever. You won't see that stuff. So I do like to put start times 7 a.m., 7 p.m. It's okay if it's just morning or afternoon, not the middle of the day, but also not when you're going to be sleeping. So remember that. Remember, they can't overlap. So if you do have two different programs with start times on them, so for example, just to make it real simple, program A is for your drip system, your trees and shrubs, and it waters for 2 hours, right? Starts at 7 a.m. You don't want any other programs, B or C, to start during that 2-hour period. So from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m., you don't want any of the other programs to start. So don't put program B to come on at 8 a.m. right in the middle of your drip system watering. What'll happen is there's not enough water pressure for everything to water at once. If your program A is doing what I just said, from 7 to 9, it's watering your drip system, and then your lawn sprinklers that are on program B pop on at 8 right in the middle of it, there won't be enough pressure for your lawn to even water. So make sure you know from the start time, how long is it going to water, and don't put another program's start time within that period to overlap. That's it. So I usually like to do drip emitters starting at 7 p.m. in the afternoon. I kind of think that putting that water out there in the nighttime soaks it in deeper, less evaporation. And then lawns, I would water at 7 a.m. Just for example, not that exact, but the reason being for lawns too, that winter lawns, especially if you water them before it gets dark, they can stay wet all night long, and that's an opportunity for rot in winter lawns only, but it can be. So I like to water lawns in the early in the morning, and drip systems in the afternoon, and that way too you never overlap them. That way it's just an easy way to not have to do as much math to account for how long it's going to run for. Okay, so don't overlap. Make sure I'm on track here. Set start times to morning and evening. Let's talk about that. Yeah. Oh, second and third start times, right? Let me get to a slide with it. Okay, so on this particular timer, the way you would check the start times is turn that dial in the middle, and you would turn that dial in the middle, and you'd get it to start time 1, and that would be the one most people would use, right? That means, and remember, you have to know what program you're in. If I slid that little ABC slide switch on the left-hand side, upper left, to B, that would be a whole different number right there, or off. And if I slid it down to C, it would be a whole different number there. So remember, each program has its own start time. That said, if you leave it on A and turn the dial to 2, that's your second start time, and it's almost never used. I would not use it unless one reason I've used it is to start lawn seed. Right now is I think this week or next be a good time to put lawn seed down for the winter, ryegrass seed. And it needs a lot of water when it first goes down. They're like 3 times a day, doom. So what you could do, start time number 1, and remember you're still on the same program, A or whatever. Program number 1 is the one you always water your lawn on. And then, so say that's 7 a.m. You would put 10 or 11 a.m. for another start time, and then maybe 4 p.m. for your third start time. And that way you're watering your lawn 3 times a day. And then right as it comes up and starts to grow, then you could turn off start time 3 And then as it gets big enough to mow and stuff, you know, then you turn off start time 2, and then you're back to 1 start time. It's the only time I've used more than 1 start time. There's probably other examples, but that's the main one. More than likely, you only, if you want to simplify again, it's just start time number 1 on each program that you're going to use. So that's start time. And let me see if there's I think there's a slide. That these are just slides about what I've already explained. Like that's checking. So see the slide switch in the top left, I've moved to B and it's off. So that way I know no matter what other information is in program B, it doesn't matter because it's never going to come on. This is another brand. The brand to go over each time we do something here is Hunter, and that's the next most common brand probably. So on Hunter brands, I've turned the dial from run, the little dial in the middle, I've turned it from run over to start times, 2 clicks to the right there, start times. And then up in the little screen, it has 1. And remember, what's the most important thing we're looking for is what program am I on? A. So program A, there's a little A there in the screen. And start time number 1, that's 4:45 p.m. it looks like. So 4:45 p.m. is my first start time. I could push the right arrow button to see if there's a start time 2 or a start time 3, which, like I say, usually aren't used, but I could check. If I push that PRG button, which might be the next, no. If I push that PRG button on the top right, the A would switch to B, and I would check the start time for B. And if I pushed it again, it would be C, so on and so on. So that's how you check the start times on a Hunter. And at the same time, that's how you would add or subtract a start time. I don't know if anybody's not familiar with how to do this. So if I wanted to change that 4:45 to whatever, to 5 o'clock, you push the plus button and the minus button to move the time up and down. While you're looking at the start time, if you push the plus and minus button, it would get you round and round and round. And if you wanted to turn that start time off, like I was saying, if you wanted to add them and take them back off for the lawn, for the seed, then what you do is you push plus or minus, doesn't matter, and hold it down until it rotates around the cycle until it finally, it'll pause and say off, and then it'll start counting again. Usually it's like 11:59 and then off and then midnight, like that. Or some timers do it every 6 hours. There'll be a position for off. Basically, you hold the plus button down until it pauses and says off, and then stop quick, and then you're off. But that's how you do that. And that's how you also change or add a time, is with the plus and minus buttons while you're looking at that time. Same thing back on this slide. If I was on that start time right there and wanted to put a start time on program B, then I would use the plus and minus buttons, same thing. Plus and minus buttons top right, and I would use them to add to, it would go round and round and around the clock, and I just stop it on the time that I would want to be my start time. All right, so we've talked about start time, hopefully plenty. That's, like I say, it's always where I start, because remember, if there is no start time on a program, I don't have to worry about any other details of that program again. Now, the run time, the next detail of each program, A, B, and C, whatever you're working on. So run time is the amount of time you program into different numbered valves. We've talked about that. Each of those valves is going to run for a certain amount of time. Each of those valves has a number associated with it in your timer. So there's valves out there. There'll be valve number 1, valve number 2, valve number 3. They all water something different. And each one of them opens for that amount of time. Each one of them runs for that amount of time before it shuts back off. So that's a run time. And we'll talk about how to put them in right now. So different stations can have different amounts of time within the same program. I'll try to go slow through this. Bottom part of this slide, it is important, so I'll go through it. So different stations, and remember, I put stations, valves, and zones because it's all the same thing. Some timers call it a station, some timers call it a zone, some timers call it a valve. The actual thing out there that you're controlling is called a valve. I tend to use that word just because it makes more sense, but each type of timer does it differently. Let me see if I can regroup on this because it's a little complicated. So different valves or stations out there in the yard can be programmed with different amounts of time within the same program. So program A doesn't have to have the same amount of run times for every valve that it runs, because it can run more than one valve. I think this will make more sense as I go through it, so I'm just going to move into how to do it. All the stations within the same program have to be programmed for the same frequency though. So all of program A has to water at the same frequency. If one valve has an hour on it and the next valve has half an hour on it, and they're both programmed into B, then they'll run consecutively. One will run for an hour, then it'll switch to the next one. It'll run for half an hour, but they have to run at the same frequency. So they can be different run times on the same program, but they have to water once a week or every day or once a month or whatever the frequency is. That's the same for each program. Let me see if it makes more sense as we go through it. Let's just program here. So this is a little chart that you keep around. You can make your own on a piece of paper. These come with timers, but they're rarely in the timer when I come to check. They get lost, blown away, whatever. But if you have one, use it. If not, you can do it on a piece of graph paper or anything else. But I like the way this one's set up. So just to orient yourself on it, on the left-hand side are valves or stations. They use both words. So each one of those numbers is associated with a valve out there in the yard. You might only have one. Remember, to really simplify, if you just have drip system for trees and shrubs in your front yard, for example, you might only have one valve out there in the whole yard, and then you would only need one program to water it. So A, that would be the simplest it gets. But sometimes you might have your front and backyard that are both drip systems, but each one has its own valve, because you can't water both the front and the backyard on at the same exact time, because there wouldn't be enough pressure, right? So each valve out there has a number associated with it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In this case, this person has 3 valves in their yard. Number 1, number 2, and number 3. And then if you look across the top, they're different programs. So if you go to the right on valve 1, you have 2 hours of a run time. That's your run time. 2 hours on program A. That's why it's in that column, not the B or the C column. So if I follow the column for program A down, valve number 1 is going to run for 2 hours. Valve number 2 is not going to run at all. Pay attention. If I work from program A downward, valve number, so the valve out there in the yard that's called number 1, is going to open for 2 hours and then shut. Valve number 2 is not going to do anything. It's going to skip it, and then it's going to run valve 3 for 30 minutes. And that's what timers do, right? When it says it's time for program A to start, at the start time we put in there, 7 a.m., whatever, that's what it's going to do. It's going to start valve 1, run it for 2 hours. Right when it stops, valve 3 is coming on for a half an hour, and then the whole thing's done. That program's done. Not going to happen again until the frequency tells it to come on again next Tuesday or tomorrow, whatever. So that's one program, and the valves that have run times on it are the ones that are going to run. So this person also has a program B, and on program B, if you follow that straight down, all it does is water valve 2. Remember, it doesn't water valve 1 or valve 3, because those are on A. So the valves that water with program A are not going to water ever, as far as I can think, on program B. They're either on one or the other. That's why you have 2 programs, because some valves are going to run on one and some valves are going to run on the other one. So on program B, it's just going to turn on number 2 for 20 minutes, and that's lawn. So this chart does not talk about the frequency whatsoever. I don't rate the frequency in these charts, because that's what changes all year long, remember. So you kind of wing it on that. It's like you go out there, look at what's going on, check the soil, see if it's drying out between waterings, and you change the frequency often. And that's the next thing we'll talk about. But as far as run times go, they're all on this chart, and I hope that explains how they work as far as being on one program but not the other. If you have a more complicated system, usually because there's lawn, that needs a different frequency of watering than drip system that needs a different frequency of watering. That's why you need A and B. And this is how you would separate them. Some valves would run on A, the ones that all need the same frequency. And then other valves would run on B that need a different frequency of watering. And that way you can control them separately instead of having to water your lawn at the same frequency as your 5-year-old trees. So, man, I spun circles there for a while, but hopefully some of that made sense. The other thing that's listed on here is your start times at the very bottom in the middle, start time 1, 2, and 3. There's no 2 and 3. You got to kind of do the curve there, follow B, program B, you follow it all the way down, hang a right, and that's 7 a.m. is the start time on that. Program A, you go all the way down, go to the right, and it's 7 p.m. is the start time for program A. So these kind of charts are nice to have around. It'll remind you if you have to reprogram your timer, battery went dead, whatever, you can put all that information right back in without having to figure it out again. And it also, I think, helps me explain kind of why we need different programs for different types of plants. So as far as putting a runtime in, we're gonna get back to that. How do you put a runtime into the type of timer, Irritrol, and you turn that dial? Well, for one, let me start with, to program anything into these type of timers, you have to start by the very bottom middle is set programs, it says, and it's a slide switch back and forth. You put it in the middle of that slide. If you put it to the left, it'll never do anything. That's stop or off. If you put it to the right, that's how you leave it to let it run automatically, and no one can change your program on accident if it's in that run position on the right. So to make changes, you got to slide it to the middle, and then you would turn the dial to, remember what the valves get run times, and the valves have numbers. Each valve out there is a number, and that's where you put the run time. So you turn the dial to number 1, and following the chart we just looked at, number 1 had 2 hours on it. But remember on what program? A. So I got the button on the top left on A, and then I turn the dial to 1, and I push the plus button until I get to 2 hours, and then I'm done. And then I would turn the dial again to 2. Make sure that 2 has 0 on it, and then I would turn the dial again to 3, and then I would put 30 minutes into the 3. And then I also usually go through, even though I might not have valves 4, 5, 6, or if they're out there and you don't know what they do, if all you want to happen is for valve 1 and valve 3 to come on with program A, I like to make sure that all the other ones say off. So when you turn it to 2, it should say off. When you turn it to 4, 5, and 6, it should say off. If it doesn't, you use the plus and minus buttons to get it there. So that's the way I would check the run times on just program A. The other type of, let me see where I'm at here. The other type of timer, Hunter, the way you would do that is you turn the dial from run. This one's all about the dial in the middle. You turn the dial from run down to run times, where it's at now on this slide. So now that you're on run times, what's the next thing you got to make sure you're on is what program. I'm on A, B, C, whatever. It's on A. So on A, this valve 4 has 40 minutes on it. So the way you would change the valve on this one would be the right and left arrows. And if you push the left arrow, for example, it would be valve 3, valve 2, valve 1, and whatever one you're on, then you use the plus and minus buttons to put a runtime on it of whatever runtime you want, or you'd use the plus and minus buttons to make sure it says off, and then you know that valve's not going to run on that program A. So that's the way you change a runtime or take it on and off on a Hunter brand. So the frequency, one that we change the most, you're going to go out to your timer hopefully now much more often, 4 or 5 times a year at least. You're going to look at the screen, make sure it's not flashing, and then check the program a little bit. And the main thing that you're going to make changes on is a frequency. So each program has its own frequency of irrigation. If A runs at this frequency, B runs at this frequency, C at that. the only input in the program that you should change on a regular basis. So the entire program will run at that frequency designated to be sure that all plants are being watered on that program require the same frequency of irrigation. So I've talked about it a million times. So that means like your whole drip system would need about the same frequency of watering. It could be more than one valve, could be the front yard and the backyard, but they're both drip emitters, so they could both be on the same program, A, for example. It's when you have something weird like lawn, something different like lawn or a vegetable garden. A lot of people put, that's where that C might come in handy. The program C might be for a vegetable garden that you want to water, again, at a different frequency. If you have a valve out there that you want to dedicate to a vegetable garden, it's not going to water at the same frequency as your trees and shrubs, so you need a different program for it. Potted plants on the porch, I've done that too. Potted plants on the porch or whatever, container gardens, need water every day in the summer. There's for sure no way that you're going to water your trees and shrubs in your yard at the same frequency as you do the pots on the porch. So that would be another reason to have a whole different program with a whole different frequency of watering. It'll have its own start time. It'll have its own run times that are only on the valve that waters those pots. And then it'll be its own frequency for just those pots. So again and again and again, that's why you need different programs, different frequency of watering. And so how do you do this? How do you put a frequency into the timer? On the Irritrol timer, remember you got to slide that switch in the middle to set programs. And then you turn the dial to past the days of the week. You can use the days of the week. But here's where I'm going to talk about why I like that skip days where I have it turned to right now, right? The skip days setting is it's separate from all the days of the week. Once you put skip days, you turn it to skip days and use the plus and minus button to add or subtract skip days. So I got it on 9, right? If I leave it there, if I were to turn it back to the days of the week, they would all be blank. They have lines through them because you're not using the days of the week anymore. Now, on the 9th day, it waters. So day 1, now it has a whole new cycle. It's not the days of the week. It's day 1, no water. Day 2, no water. Day 3, no water. Blah, blah, blah. Day 9, it waters. And then day 1 starts over again. And then not on day 1, not on day 2, not on day 3. Day 9, it waters again. So that's how you do that. That's how you use the skip days function. When you use skip days, the days of the week don't work. Or you could turn that to off. The skip days, you go minus down to like 3, 2, 1s off. And then you go back to the days of the week, which is fine. The only reason I would use days of the week is for lawns. If you have a lawn guy or you mow it at a certain day of the week every week, and you want to make sure that your lawn doesn't water on that day that they come to mow it. Then I would use the days of the week for lawn only. But I love the skip days, and we'll talk about the Hunter brands, what it's called on there. And I'll tell you why. Remember that landscape that's 5 years old and all desert adapted, might only need water once a month in the wintertime? How do you do once a month with Sunday through Saturday? There's no way. People think they have to water once a week no matter what forever, because it comes down to I just water on Sunday or I just water on Tuesday. With a weekly cycle like that, the furthest you can stretch the frequency is 7 days. You're not stuck with that. So if you can go 20 days, you can go 30 days, some go up to 60 days, 90 days, whatever. Different timers have a different maximum. But that's how you go as a landscape gets more mature. You will, especially drip systems, you'll be stretching that frequency beyond a week in no time. So I like to use skip days, and on a Hunter brand, you go to days, you turn that dial to down, click, 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 click to water days. And then you use the right and left arrows, the right one with the little hand on it. You'd push that and it goes through all the days of the week. They flash, each day of the week flashes. And then it goes into other stuff. It's like odd days, even days. I've never used those. And then it finally goes into interval. It's INT, I think it says INT. And that's the same as skip days, just a different word. So it's interval. And I did the same thing. Once I got to interval, INT, instead of the days of the week flashing, that's what's on there. And then I pushed the plus button until I got to 9, and now it's going to water every 9 days, same as the other one did on skip days. And remember, check the program that you're on when you're doing this. I'm on A here. It's very important because the frequency is mainly the only reason why you have different programs. So you have to be sure what program you're on when you're doing these changes. And let me see here. I think there's a couple other things that I like people to know how to do besides putting in. So we've talked about how to enter the 3 pieces of a program. That's all there is. There's 3 pieces: the start time, the run time, and the frequency for each program, A, B, C, whatever ones you're using. I'm going to be done with that and hope the questions come about what I missed or confused you about. But the last 2 things that I want you to know how to do, that's very important for checking your system, is manually starting a whole program. And then also how to start one valve out there with your timer. I mean, there's ways to do it manually with the plumbing, but this is how to, the manually starting a whole program. I love doing it when I want to check. So if you're never around when your program A starts, and you want to see what's happening out there, if all the drip emitters are working or if it's watering deep enough and you want to check that, and you don't want to sit around and wait for the start time to start automatically, this is how you manually start the whole program. Let it do its thing, check it while it's running, and then maybe check the depth of the water or the area that's getting wet when it waters. You do all those checking things after it when it finishes. And so this is how you do it. On the Irritrol, you do not move the slide switch in the middle at the bottom to set programs. You're not changing a program now. You're not doing anything permanent. You're just doing a temporary water the program. You got to choose what program, A, B, or C. So that's the most important part. You leave that slide switch to run, the one in the middle of the bottom. You leave it on the right to run where you should find it. It's where it should have been when you open the timer. And all you do is select a program, slide that top left switch or slide, A, B, or C. It's on B. And when I push the bottom left-hand button, semi-auto, start A, B, or C, that's what happens. B starts just like it would on its start time, whenever that might be, but it does it right now. And when it's done, it never does it again. So like I say, you're not making any permanent changes. You're letting it do its thing like it always does automatically, but you're making it do it right now when you can sit there and watch. And when you do that, if your system is complicated enough to have 5 valves of lawn, for example, some big pieces of lawn, they take a lot of valves to water. This little piece waters and then it shuts off, and the next one waters and it shuts off, and the next one waters and shuts off. So you might have 5 valves out there that are all for your big piece of lawn. They're all on program B. They all have the same start time. They all have the same frequency. And so when you push that B and semi-auto, it'll run the whole thing just like it does. 1 will do what it does normally, stop, 2 will start, 3 will start, or whatever. So it does exactly what it does automatically, but it does it right now. And you need to know, I think everyone should know how to do this to make checks, maintenance checks to your system. Or you also could use it if it's May, it's hot, it's dry, it's windier than normal, but you know it's only going to be for a week or 2, whatever, record heat or record wind or I don't know what, but it's weird. It's not something you want to go in and change your whole frequency of your program for. You just know that today your landscape needs a little more water than it normally would this time of year. Go out there, put it on the program you want to water, and push semi-auto and go back in the house. And that's a way to, you get 1 more watering cycle out of your system that'll never happen again, just to supplement for a little extra dry, a little extra hot, whatever. So I do that all the time, honestly, especially at the nursery with valves that I walk up on. I'm not ready to change the frequency yet because it's a little brief heat wave or something, and I'm not ready to really go and change the program. I open up the door, select the program, hit that button, shut the door, and walk away. And it's an easy way to get some extra water. One-time deal, one-shot deal. So Hunter, that has the same thing. Turning this dial to the left, everything we've done is on the right where the blue section is. Everything in the green on the left is a temporary thing. Everything on the right on the blue is a permanent thing. So you program on the blue side, and you do these two things I'm talking about on the green side. So you turn the dial 2 clicks to the left. You're on manual all stations, right? And again, the only thing you got to choose is what program. You push the PRG button there on the top right until you get to the ABC you want. And then this is the part that took me a while to figure out because I'm not good at reading instructions. You turn it to run. After you select what program you want to run, you just turn the dial 2 clicks back to the right and leave it on run. It waits like, I don't know what, 1 second or something, and it kicks it on. And it'll do the same thing as the other timer does on that semi-auto. That's how you do it on a Hunter. You turn it to that all stations, pick your program, and right when you turn the dial back to run, it kicks it into that one-time manual run. So manually starting this, so this is different, right? This is not running a whole program, A, B, or C. It's running one valve out there. And this is one where you could for sure go out there in that valve box in the ground and turn it on manually with your hand down in the underground. But sometimes you're closer to the timer. Sometimes you're afraid of the bugs that are in that box. I don't know. So sometimes it's just easier to do it with the timer, to start that timer for a certain amount of time. And this another reason is because when you do it with the timer, you can put how many minutes you want it to run for, and you don't have to come back and turn it off. Whereas if you turned it on manually with your hand in the ground, you would have to remember to come back and turn it back off. So this would be just one valve out there, right? Not the whole program, one valve. You want to run it for however many minutes you want, and you want it to go off when it's done automatically and never do it again. Remember, we're not changing the program. We're just doing this one-shot deal. This is how you do it. So say this one, it's the first time I'm going to say this. It does not matter what program you're in. ABC, it doesn't matter what that slide switch is on the left, top left. The bottom slide switch in the middle should be on run, just like we did the last time. That should be where you find it on run. The only thing you do is turn the dial to the number. Remember, each valve out there has a number associated with it, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you turn the dial to the number. You use the plus and minus buttons to put 20 minutes on there is what I did on this example. And when you push now the right hand bottom button with the little hand, manual it says, when you push that manual button, turn the dial back to current time, it'll water that one valve for 20 minutes and never do it again. And you could put 4 hours on there if you want. I use this one for, say, a drip system that I want to leach the salts out. I think maybe the salt builds up in our soil after watering kind of, a little bit and it dries out, a little bit and it dries out. It's common that you build up salt in the soil for, if you have queen palms or something like that, it definitely hurts them to have that salt build up, the little white crunchies all over the surface of the soil. So one good way to get rid of them is to water for way longer than you normally would, and it dissolves that water, or that salt, and washes it away. You can do it with your timer, and you would put 4 hours, 5 hours with that plus button, and then turn the manual on and let it run. That's one reason you use that. You can also use it to check the drip emitters, check the sprinkler heads. If you could do it with your lawn sprinklers. If you're just wondering if one of those 5 valves has a broken head on it, you can go over to your timer, turn the dial to that one valve number, put just 3 minutes on it or something, 2 minutes, and poof, let it pop up, and you'll know if it's broken or needs work or whatever. So that's another use for this mode. How do you do it on a Hunter? You turn the dial again to the green side. It's the next one down, and it works the same way. You turn it to one, it's manual one station, and you select which valve you want with the right and left arrows, right? The right and left arrows, you get to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever valve you want to work on. Then you use the plus button to give it some minutes, however many minutes you want. And when you turn the dial back to run, same thing. When you turn the dial back to run, it pauses for a minute and then kicks that on. So that's how you do it all. And I think that is getting close to wrapping it up. That was the program, that original program. I wanted to explain one more thing. Remember that the flow of your drip system matters a lot as far as how long you run for, and also how deep the water goes into the soil. So just a last reminder, I didn't talk hardly anything about those drip emitters out there around each plant. This slide's to remind me that the citrus bubbler is only 30 minutes. That's because bubblers, if anybody has them, they used to be real common, but not anymore. A lot of water comes out of a bubbler, like gallons of water in minutes. And so you don't water for as long. So remember, those things change the way you program the timer. The soil type, the type of emitters that are out there around the plant. And remember, you're trying to get the whole area under the plant wet when you water it. And that usually takes more drip emitters and heavier flow emitters than most people out there have around the plant. So if you've done all this right, you're programmed your timer perfectly, but you're still seeing those signs of drought. Remember, let the plant tell you. Make sure the soil dries out between waterings and you know your frequency is good. Other than that, watch those plants and let them tell you if they're dry or not. And if you see those symptoms of drought, the wilt or the leaves falling out of the middle of them, and your timer seems to be set perfectly as far as what we've talked about, I would suspect that your drip emitters out there are not putting enough water out to get the whole area under the plant wet when it waters, especially older plants like a yellow bell bush or an orange jubilee that's 6 feet by 6 feet is not going to live on 1 gallon per hour drip emitter. I don't care if you water it for 20 hours, it still won't do it. So haven't talked about it much, but remember to also check your emitters and that they're all getting water. What you could do is use the what we just talked about to run the program when you can watch it and check it, and right when it's done you go out there and see if it really did wet the whole area under the plant, because that is honestly the most common way that plants are not getting enough water, is not heavy enough drip emitters and not enough of them. So last thing on that, the rest was about programming. Hopefully you caught most of that. And now questions. So I think that is, yeah. Katie, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jonathan.
I figured if I really messed something up, you were going to pop in and
you did a great job.
All right, good.
So I only see that we have one question, and that is, how do we know what type of soil we have? What do we look for? We live far west in Goodyear, Buckeye area.
That's a good question. And really it's digging. If you've ever installed anything, can you hear me? Well, yeah. So if you've ever like dug a hole to install anything, you'd know right away. It's pretty much the soil types, the extremes are lots of little rocks and sand is the really fast draining one side of the scale. The other is that it's super dense clay, and that would be the type of soil that sticks to your shoes when it's wet. You know, when you get an inch taller every step you take out and back, when it's wet, that would be clay soil. So the texture will tell you. Also drainage. I mean, if you already have a drip system and it's watering your plants, you would notice that if it spreads out real nice and wide, it's probably clay. So when you water, you notice the whole area under the plant's getting wet. It's probably clay soil, and you have a heavy enough flow of water that it spreads out. If it's very, very hard to spread out at all and it soaks in really, really fast, I would just guess that you have sandy soil. And gravelly soils is visible. It's easy to tell. If you have gravel in your yard, then, I mean, not the layer of gravel that's mulch under that, like the natural soil. If it's gravelly and sandy, and you can see that. And if it's sticky mud, then you have the clay type that usually spreads out a little bit wider and stays wet for longer.
Oh yeah, no, I think we have the rocky type of one you were talking about.
Yeah, yeah, it's a little harder to manage. And so what you do with that type of soil is you're going to especially have to worry about spreading that water out. Those types of soil is really where I see that the drip emitters that are most common don't put water fast enough. Don't put water out fast enough to spread out. They soak in real good. Your 3 feet of depth is going to be easy. You know, that's the easy part. So I wouldn't worry about your depth. I would do like maybe a 45. Do you know what your runtime is now? How long does your drip system run for?
Well, we just had somebody reset it. This is all confusing to me. You're making it more clear to me, but it's still a little confusing. I think they just set it at, and we have mostly in our front yard, mostly desert plants.
Good.
We have a big pineapple palm. What's it at?
So ours is set up on 3 different things. He set it front yard, backyard, and then the citrus bubblers.
Because we have
Okay.
2 citrus trees.
But
so,
our citrus bubblers are on at like 3 or 3:30 in the morning. He put it, so we need to change that so we can see it.
Well, I mean, what would be easiest is to right away, what you can do is figure out what program they're on, or even just what valve number they're on, and then just start them on. You could start them with those manual settings that was at the end of the course there. Or you could turn them on with the valve. If you find which valve opens them when you turn it on, if you reach your hand down in the box that's underground, all those valves that have a way to turn them on, usually you twist there's a little black canister with 2 wires coming out the top.
yeah, that's how I turn mine on. I don't use the thing. I'd much rather stick my hand in there
But
and
no,
turn
I
it
think
on.
I think I
Not
can
afraid of
figure it out from your
Yeah, it's like
instructions.
the
Okay.
timer thing is like confusing. We have
Yeah.
the Hunter timer, so I'm so glad we've had both of those timers actually. I really liked running the Iritrol way better than this Hunter. This Hunter
To
is,
me, they're simpler a little, but
oh my god.
so here's the way. If you want to work your way backwards, so you know where you turn it on with your hand, and if you go in that box, and the same valve that you turn on with your hand, whatever it waters, if you want to know what it is on the timer, there's an easy way to do that too.
Okay.
So the 2 wires that come out of the top of that thing that you turn with your hand,
Right.
one is white and one is colored, right? That's just 2 wires. I mean, they both come out black, right? They both come out black out of the top of that thing.
Right.
One's connected to a white wire and one's connected to some colored wire. Whatever color that is, you remember what color wire it is, and then you go to your timer. And all timers, the little door panel thing opens up where you can see the guts of it in the back, the
Right.
wire.
Right.
That same color wire is going to be screwed into a little screw with a number on it. And then you know what valve that is.
That was my other question. How do I know what valve goes to what?
That's how, yeah. So say, let's just use the example of the one that you're turning on with your hand. It has a green wire and a white wire running. Forget about the white wire. It doesn't mean nothing.
Okay.
The green wire, if it is, say it's green, if that's what's twisted onto the black wires of that one that you're opening, you go back to the timer, you open it up to where you can see those wires where they come in, and each wire will be screwed into a different little screw, and right above the screw has a little number 1, little number 2, little 3, and
Okay.
wherever the green one screws in, that's the number that your timer is going to call that valve. So then when you're programming, say the green wire screwed into the number 1 screw, and now every time you program it, or if you want to do the quick manual start on your Hunter, you go down to the 1 station manual, and you would get it to valve 1 with the side arrows, and you'd put however many minutes you want on it with the plus.
Mhm.
And you could put the number of minutes that, just that you think it should water for. And when you turn it back to run, it'll kick it on, and then it'll run it for that many minutes. And you can go back and check, did it get wet all the way around? Did it overflow? Did it not soak in enough, or what, I mean? So, but that's how you figure out what valve number is what valve out there in your yard, by the color of the wire.
Yeah, you answered my question too. So because I think, like right now he has it set for like 35 minutes for how every day.
I'd say they're 35 or 45. I think we're too
Every
much
day.
because I go outside and I can see the rocky area. And what I need to do, I need to build up a nice little circular thing around the citrus
Berm.
trees.
Yeah.
I need to have a little more rock build up because I think right now,
That's the best way to do it would be that. But remember, you got to have that berm at the edge of the leaves. Like it should be as big around as the tree is, really,
He is.
not just right around the trunk. And it's harder to do. It doesn't have to be very high. Remember, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be like a 1 foot berm. All it has to do is maintain that water so it doesn't run off to one side or run off to the other side. And what you're going to do is that the water will come into that area, and even if it's just an inch of standing water in there, and then you run it for long enough to soak it into 3 feet deep. Like you don't need a 3 foot berm to soak the water in 3 feet deep, I guess.
Right.
And so it's just a little tiny berm way out at the drip line at the edge of the tree, but so the water doesn't run away. It's one way to do it. It's probably the best way. But if not, you can you can adjust the run time. If it's really overflowing runoff down into another area or far away from the tree, you could reduce the run time like you were talking about. So it'd water for less minutes. But you can also water it more than one time a day. You can water it maybe 3 times a day. Like you could water it for 15 minutes and let that soak in at 7 a.m. That'd be your first start time. And then you do another start time at noon and another one at 7 p.m. Some people have done that to, if it overflows with 45 minutes worth of water, for example, you could water it 3 times all in one day for 15 minutes each and give it time to soak in between each one. It's a little more complicated way to do it to me than building a berm and running it for 45 minutes. But either way, you could do that. You just need to make sure the water's soaking in deep enough.
So then do you suggest this, like I noticed for your citrus, starting them at 7 p.m. instead of morning?
I wouldn't worry too much about that. Whatever's convenient for you, as long as it's not in the middle of the day.
Right.
For citrus, it wouldn't really matter. I mean, I think it's almost a theory about my, like if you water in the afternoon, it soaks in better. I'm not sure. I don't have any proof of that, but what there is proof of is that lawns rot when you water them at night in the winter. So, I mean, that's probably the only one that's critical. The rest is kind of, I just like to see people have stuff water when they're sometimes around, but if even that can be fixed by frequently going out there and starting it, running the program and letting it run and seeing what happens.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to do that because he says, well, I'll just wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
No.
I'm like,
This is real easy. So if you have a hunter, start with A. You don't even have to know what anything does. Just leave it on A, and you go to here. Let me do. Can you guys can still see my PowerPoint, right?
Yes.
All right.
Oh, see that? I just want to say real quick. See, already there's the torch cactus. In the survey, there'll be a question of what plant would Jonathan plant with his desert dollars? So the answer is torch cactus. So that's.
I already wrote that down. I already wrote that because I love those. Those are beautiful.
That was
for everybody else. That will be a question.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a lucky accident. I ended up on that slide for everybody.
Yeah. No, those are really nice. I would like to.
Oh, actually, I didn't know if I could get my slide going. I brought one in from my yard today. Look, can you guys see that?
Oh, beautiful.
That.
It's kind of closed up for the night, but that thing is like this big around, you know. They're huge and they flower all the time, all from spring to fall. And just look for the right color if you're getting, make sure they know what color they are when you buy one. So let me see here. I'm trying to get all the way to the end. The manual start right, the next one up.
Okay.
Right there. That's what you do. And you know what? Just go do it on your timer. Just pick A and then you put the dial right there, pick A and turn it to run. Then you see what happens. Now you know what A does. You know what I mean? You don't have to know what it does before you do it. Just try it. So after you're done doing that, say you did that and the citrus trees came on. Now you know that A is the citrus. And then you would do the same thing again, turn the dial down to manual all stations. You'd push the program button to B, and then you turn the dial up to run and wait and see what happens. Go out in the yard and look around and see what's running and for how long. And do the same with C. If you have a C, then that would be, so that's a good way to not only check the system, make sure it's not leaking everywhere, make sure it's not overflowing. You can make sure it's putting enough water out. It's a really good way to just see what your timer does without going through all the programs and checking all the detailed information in the program. It just let it do its thing, and you don't have to wait for it to do it for sure on its own.
Well,
So just
that's what I think. I don't think, when they built the houses here, we're in the Las Brisas area. They just, they're on the little spaghetti things. And I don't think a lot of our stuff gets a lot of water. They just ran it real quick. I think we're eventually going to have to put a new drip system in because we have a huge Mexican fan palm or palm in the back. And there's 2 small baby emitters coming out of it.
Yeah. I mean, how old's the landscape? Do you know how old's the yard?
We've been in here
a little over 2 years.
It was built in 2014. So it was built in 2014.
Yeah. So, I mean, things are starting to get established, and palms they can hold water for a long time. That trunk of a palm is a lot like a saguaro. It sucks up water and holds it for a really long time. So they do need water, but they don't need water as frequently as other plants.
Yeah.
They don't wilt really ever. They like can close up a little bit, but what I would say is if you think certain things are needing more, I would definitely diagnose what does what on your timer by doing that. See what A does and see what B does and see what C does. And then also see how much water is on the ground after it's done running. But don't forget the hose. You should have a garden hose and you should use it a lot. What I do is you can run your drip system on as least frequently as you think even possible. And just supplement. Are you guys here year round, or you come just for the winter?
Oh no, we're here year round. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, then I would definitely just kind of keep an eye on plants. If they look good and they're not showing signs of drought, and the ground dries out between waterings, you're good. Really, that's all that matters. I mean, if the stuff looks good and the ground dries out between waterings, then you're got everything close enough.
Well, see, and this is the first year we've lost anything. I mean, this is the first year we've lost. I lost a small cactus. I have this really cool cactus out in the front that bloomed. It's the one that the little thing comes out and it's a little pink flower that comes out in the center. And now that kind of like died in the center. So parts of it are still okay and parts of it are not. I mean, it just really took a toll on our yard this year.
Is my email available anywhere else, Katie? Or is it just on that front slide?
I can send it out.
Oh, I wrote it down.
We wrote it down. We're taking notes.
Yeah, if you could, any specific species, if you sent me a picture of it, I could tell a whole lot. For one, if it just they died all over town and you're not alone, or if it looks like it might come back or whatever, just you can email me pictures.
Yeah, and we're new to all this. I mean, we're from Wyoming, so I'm not used to the desert landscape. It's all new to us, and I'm still trying to figure it out with the water. And because I know, like in the mornings when we leave for work, I notice that around some of the plants, you could tell it's wet. It's not, but you could tell where there was water. So there is some water getting to it. I just don't know, like you spoke about emitters. I don't know what, like some of the plants, I couldn't even find the emitters on these plants. That they just
you got to dig in. That's why I would definitely start with running each program, A, B, and C, with that manual all stations. Just run each program and then have some time. I mean, you got to kind of look through as the water's coming out, and like you say, you might see water's coming out of this one, but the one right next to it, you can't find where the water's coming out. So you get a little trowel and you dig around the gravel a little bit and try to find it. So
it's real drippy. It's not real, like it's very sparse. So I think we're going to have to.
Well, and I doubt you would need a whole new drip system being only that old. What you might need is to find those drip emitters, run all the programs, and if you find that they're not putting out enough water, then you can also change just the drip emitters, and even you can change them one by one. This plant needs more, so put more on it. This plant is fine, so don't do anything with it. But you could just change drip emitters, a pretty easy job. You can, there's two ways drip emitters are put in, and I'll tell you the easy way to tell. If you go out there, if you even find one of the skinny little black tubing that comes up out of the ground, it'll either be a hollow tube, or it will be a drip emitter on the end of it. Do you know what yours are?
The ones in the front are a hollow tube, so it's like
there are no emitters on them.
Very little water.
Well, so what they are then? That's that type of system. The emitter, if you followed that, and you'll have to pull it out of the ground real gently. If you follow that little hollow tube down, the thicker tubing that's underground is going to only be maybe 3 inches deep at the most. Most people are lazier than that, and it ends up like barely covered with gravel. So you'll find the thicker tubing underground at the worst 3 inches deep, and you follow that little skinny tubing down, and there's going to be a drip emitter poked into so that system, what they do is there's a thicker tubing underground, and then they poke the emitter into the thicker tubing, and everything that follows out from there is just hollow skinny tubing. So there is drip emitters. Unfortunately, to change those out, you have to kind of dig a little hole down to the thicker tubing every one that you want to switch. that no matter what you do on the hollow end of it above ground, it won't change anything because your drip emitter's underground.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So you could put as many drip emitters on the tips of that as you want. You could put a T, a Y, whatever you want. It all does the same thing. It's taken down to one drip all the way underground where it pokes into the big. It'll look like a little flying saucer. It looks like a little flying saucer with one pokey side, and
Right.
then the hollow tubing goes into that, and that's what you have to change. So you have
it's
to.
the opposite. So rather than it being on the top, they have it on the
On the
bottom
bottom,
to the
yes.
hose.
And there is benefits to that. That when the drip emitter's above ground. So if you were to go out in your yard, other people that might be listening, if you go out in your yard and you find the actual drip emitter, that little flying saucer thing, or the little thing with the
have
flag on
those.
it, that means they've been that little skinny tubing pokes into the thick tubing underground at full pressure. So if you were to pull the dripper off the end of that, it would come like a geyser out of the end of it. So the problem is if you weed whack it off, or if a puppy chews it off, or if you kick it off, you got a leak now out there. Where the way you have your system with that drip emitter all the way underground poked into the big tubing, it's a little safer as far as like not having leaks. It's just a way bigger pain to change them out or unclog them or replace them. So, but it's not, I mean, it's not going to be that deep. And you can do them one by one, start with the plant you think needs the most water, and not only change the ones that you pull up and find, change those to a bigger flow. And I bet you anything they're 1 gallon per hour or 2 gallon per hour. And even if you don't know what they are, you could replace them with like a 5 gallon per hour is a pretty good flow. And replace them with those. You can also, once you find that thicker tubing underground, you kind of go in both directions a little bit, maybe a foot or two out, and poke 2 new holes and put more drip emitters under there in there.
Oh, because I think
It
what
has
I
a
did
big-
was,
it's bigger.
I think when I was putting things on, I thought, oh, this doesn't have an emitter on it. And I started putting emitters on some of these things.
Yeah,
and-
so now you have 2 emitters on the same,
Oh, okay. And
which
do you
doesn't do anything
prefer those-
differently.
Do you prefer the saucer looking ones versus the ones that have like the little things
The
on the
little
top?
handle thing.
The saucer kind is the only kind that you can put underground. If you wanted to transfer your whole system to the
Putting
ones that go
the
above
top.
ground,
Yeah.
what you put in the bottom where your saucer things are now, you pull that out and you put just a hollow little tube. It's
Right.
a coupling. And then you go above ground. And if you turn your system on that way, it would really come out of the end of that little skinny tube, like full pressure. And then what you put on the end is going to be whatever kind of drip emitter you want. I don't prefer, I prefer the flag type, maybe, I guess. They all have their pros and cons. So
We've had
really,
both. We've had both. So
Yeah. The
just-
flying saucer ones are less apt to get damaged. They're just kind of bulletproof. They clog. Once they clog, you pull it off and you put another one on. You pull it off and throw it away and put another one on.
Mhm.
The flag ones are made to unclog and put back together. The flag doesn't do anything but come out. You twist
Right.
it until it pops out. You put it back in. That's just for cleaning. So you can't clean the flying saucer ones, but they tend to be a little more like stable. The ones I love, the adjustable heads, it comes out like a little sprinkler. It's like a dial, and you can turn it all the way off, or you can
It's like
turn
a
it.
mini bubbler. It's like
Yeah.
a mini, yeah.
Those, I love the amount of water they put out, but over and over, I set them to the perfect kind of sprinkler that I want, and I come back in a week and they're either half that or twice that, or the little dial thing blows off too. So I don't know. I mean, if you're checking it often, you can get a lot of water out of those things, and I love them. But if you kind of want like a set it and forget it thing, they're not the most reliable.
We have some more questions. So Mike asks, how much water would you recommend for a fence post or totem poles? And it looks like after that Deborah might have a question.
Good cactus question. So I would, do it with the hose. I wouldn't do it with the drip system. Hose water, honestly, is a better way to water things because the water spreads out further and you could adjust the volume. If it's not spreading out further, you turn it up. It's easy. And you turn it back down if it's overflowing off into somebody else's yard. So you can adjust the flow with the hose. I would throw the hose on those cactus and make a big puddle, 3-4 foot wide puddle. Doesn't have to be a perfect circle, but more or less. You can start right at the base of the cactus, and I would run it for, depending on the kind of soil you have, if your soil drains really fast, I'd run it for maybe 1 hour. If your soil drains pretty slow, I would turn the flow down a little bit and run it for 4 hours maybe. And I would only do that like at the most every 2 weeks in the hottest part of summer, like May and June, and probably once a month the rest of that. And it also matters how old they are. If they're brand new, you got to do it a little more frequently, more like the 2-week cycle. And if they're old and been in the ground for a long time, once a month all year round would be plenty. So, you know, you really just want the soil to go bone dry between waterings. And then you want it to, when you do water, you want to make a big wet spot and you want it to soak in really, really deep. And what cactus do, you know, prickly pear, they've studied, and they can grow 6-8 feet of root in a day. When a rainstorm happens in the desert, the rain comes down, soaks into the soil. They grow 8 feet of root out in one day, suck up all the water they can, and the water's gone in a couple days, but they have that water now up in their body, you know? So that's the way cactus work. When the water's there, they can absorb it really fast, and they can absorb a lot of it and swell up big and fat. And then they're made to go a long time without water again. And if they get water over and over and over during that time, that's when they could rot and die from the overwater. So I like to treat them more like they get in the wild and get a whole bunch of water, like it was a heavy rainstorm, soaked in really good, let them soak it all up over a week or two, and then not water them again for long enough that the soil is like bone dry all the way down. So that would be the way I'd water kind of any true cactus. And remember, they're not all cactus. Agaves are different, and aloes are different, and succulents you buy at Home Depot and Lowe's in the little 2-inch pots, those are different. But cactus, barrel cactus, saguaros, all those, all the thorny, full sun, native, or, you know, that type of cactus. If it's a true cactus, most of them could handle that kind of thing, that frequency of watering and that way to water. So agaves and aloes, just because I brought it up, they need a little more water than cactus do. There is no agave or aloe that's native to this low of a desert. Agaves are native close by, even at the top of the Estrellas, or as you go north from here, you'll find them on the sides of cliffs. They're very drought tolerant, but they're not very heat tolerant. So when it's as hot as it gets down here in the low desert, they need a little, preferably a little shade and a little more water than they would get in the wild to survive that kind of unnatural heat that they're not used to. But cactus, especially native cactus, are wonderful additions to any landscape and pretty easy to take care of.
I have a tendency to water the golden barrels or the fire barrels, but I don't water the saguaros at all, period.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, like I say, you watch them things, and if they can swell up and shrink like an accordion with the pleats that are in them, and you can let them shrink up to almost like half their diameter of when you get them, and they just puff right back up when you do finally water them good. That's a better way to ride it than keep them puffed up and fat all the time. Well, that's when you get the saguaros on the news that went through somebody's roof or cut their car in half. You know, it's just they're too fat all the time, and they never dry out, and they can't support all that weight. So if it wouldn't be for root rot, there's the weight issue too on a saguaro, a bigger saguaro. I like to ride it on the dry side, kind of let them shrink up a little bit, and then you know it's time to water again.
I'd like to add one other thing. I have underground emitters as well, and I've been successful on a couple of occasions to clear those stopped up emitters by using the compressed air like you would use for your computer.
Not to blow backwards or something?
Yes, and it worked.
That's a good idea. Yeah, so you take the compressor out there and put the rubber tip on the end of the hollow tube and blow backwards I take it with the water off.
Water's off, but I basically use a little compressed air can. You know.
Oh, okay. That's even more portable. Yeah, more portable. Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a really good idea. Yeah, it does. I mean, I've taken them out. I'm not that smart. I dig them up and blow backwards with my mouth out of the muddy thing. So that sounds much more pleasant than my method. So.
Thank you,
Deborah?
Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you.
Deborah?
Yeah, so we just living in our house for a couple of years. It's a 9-year-old house, so it's got a pretty established landscaping. But this year, it's probably due to the heat. This is our first summer that we spent down here, and our citrus trees were taking a pretty big hit.
Yeah.
And didn't have any adjustments done on our timer, and I put a new beehive timer in there, and I got it set up. So I was trying to save basically the citrus trees, and I got them set up for, I had them set for every other day for 2-hour soaks. And I did some calculations to figure that I needed about 35 gallons, or I think it was 35 gallons to get the 3 feet. But the problem I'm finding is that they didn't, as they put different landscape features and different plants in, they just found the hose in the ground and plugged it in. So I don't have a zone just for the trees and the shrubs and another zone for the citrus trees. So I'm kind of fighting to see.
Yeah. And so what type of emitters are on the citrus trees? Just regular drip emitters like the rest of this stuff has?
No, I got the dial tops that you had.
Okay.
I took and we dug out the berm around it. I put some mulch in there, and I've got like two of those spray emitters on either side of it.
And how do the citrus look? They said they took a hit through the summer, huh?
Well, the leaves were starting about halfway down on our lime trees, but I mean it's pushing out some lime. It's the fruits looks good, but the leaves were getting pretty.
Are you getting new growth now that it cooled off a little bit at night?
A little bit.
Yeah, I think
If it survived it, they should be getting new shoots. And do you have any grapefruit or what?
Yeah.
Yeah, grapefruit for some reason, man. The grapefruit and pomelos don't handle that heat very good at all. So I wouldn't. I mean, that would be perfectly normal if they lost all their leaves. Sometimes limes do too. I've seen limes lose all their leaves and come right back. That's pretty normal. But the danger you run when they don't have any leaves on them is that the skin of the trunk might burn. You could scratch it with your fingernail, and as long as it's green when you scratch the skin, you're still good. There's no problem then.
Yeah, I think I was able to save those. Now I just have to go through and do the dig test on everything else, because like I said, everything's running for 2 hours. I just set it to every third day now that it's starting.
It seems, as far as irrigation goes, it seems like unless your soil was very, very gravelly, it seems like a little too frequently. Just remember, make sure that it dries out before it waters again.
Yeah, that was a good tip we picked up. I'll start digging that around them, and then I'll just change.
If you're familiar with the timer and know that it's about to water today, before it does, make sure that it's pretty dry, about 1 inch deep. It needs to be dry, or else it shouldn't come on again. And then remember, that changes all year round because the weather makes it stay wet longer, right. Not as long. So it's really the only telltale sign that you might be watering too often is if it's not drying out between waterings. And as far as the depth going in, the 2 hours sounds plenty in most soils around town. It's pretty much the average. And then beyond that, you got to make sure that even those adjustable ones, when it does water, the whole berm, does it get wet?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're good there. And the run time sounds good. The only thing I would wonder is maybe the frequency might be even too frequently if it's not drying out before it waters again. And remember again, like I say over and over again, the hose, every once in a while, maybe a 5 or 6 hour soak with the hose does wonders for anything, really. I mean, if somebody just tells me my plants don't look that good, honestly, I could have them throw the hose on it for 5 hours, and it fixes like 90% of the problems. It washes salt away. It makes sure, any of those 3 ways that it could not be getting enough water, it fixes that too. It's like throw the hose on it for 5 hours and talk to me in 2 weeks. And if there's no new shoots coming out, then we'll look at what else might be the problem, So this time of year, you might do that. Wash a little salt away and just fill up the berms with the hose, and then turn it down to where they stay full for 4 or 5 hours, whatever, something like that, beyond what it needs for water. And that way you're sure that the salts are dissolved and washed away, sure it's getting hydrated, and then go back to making sure that it dries out between waterings. But I bet you anything within a couple weeks here, you'll see all kinds of new growth and everything sprouting back out that survived it. So
yeah, I think we might have seen it.
What about yellow leaves on citrus trees?
There's all kinds of yellow. The old leaves in the middle turning yellow and falling out. It's a good sign of drought, like we talked about. But there's new leaves that are green veined but yellow between the veins, and that's different. Fertilizer problems. The types of yellow are kind of endless. I mean, just plain yellow, or old leaves, new leaves, and then like what part of the leaf is yellow is kind of the different details.
Okay, I'll have to look at them again. I mean, it's a
Send me a
little bit better, but when it was warm, they were a little bit yellow. Not a lot of them. And then it was basically only on our lime tree, which we've had it planted for almost 2
And you
years.
can. Old leaves on citrus turn yellow and fall off naturally too. So there a lot of times any damaged leaves from a hard summer or whatever, they'll hang on there looking bad, even though new growth comes out. Remember, for anybody who's listening, that the signs of how plants are doing right now today is only in the new growth. The old leaves are showing signs of what happened 6 months ago, a year ago, who knows how long ago. The only thing that matters is the new growth, that baby new leaf coming out. And if it's dark green and growing fast, everything's perfect right now. Old leaves can be burnt, yellow, whatever, for all kinds of reasons, but all those reasons was something that happened a long time ago.
Okay. All right, that's good to know. Awesome.
Okay, so we're a little past 7:30. Does anybody else have any questions? Last questions?
Well, remember my email too. I am
Yeah.
okay with any of that.
Where's your
I'll be-
nursery?
Am I allowed to say that? Katie?
Yeah.
Oh,
Elgin Nursery is, I've been managing them for 25 years.
our
Elgin
favorite nursery. We go there we get all of our plants from you.
Yeah, good. We try, you know, and we grow the stuff locally too, makes a big difference. We do broker in some things, queen palms, a couple other, you know, real not as adapted items, but we try to stick with and recommend plants that if we can grow them here successfully, then they're going to grow for you successfully here too. So we do stick to more desert adapted plants, but I love doing it. I've been doing it for a long time. And
Oh, it's our favorite nursery. Your staff is always excellent and always
that's good to
willing to
hear.
help us and you know, so yeah. In
Good.
fact, we're talking about coming back in the next week or two and buying more plants that died. So
Yeah.
I think as far as that goes with anybody too, it was a rough summer, but I'm starting to, right now I'm doing like what normally people do in the spring, I think in other climates, but I get rid of everything that did make it. Remember, you can scratch the little skin right down by where it comes out of the ground. If it's green down there, when you scratch the skin, you got a chance it comes back. If it's brown and dead at the ground, it's time to like start over, cut losses, get rid of everything dead. And it's definitely good enough weather now to start doing everything really. I think with these cool nights now, you could start replacing anything that you want to get back. And remember to replace it with something well adapted to our climate.
I'll remember that when I go in there.
Yeah. Just because it's sold here doesn't mean it grows here.
True. That makes sense. That makes sense. So awesome. Well, thank you. Very informative.
Thank you, everybody.
Yep, and we'll start back up. We will be having a class every Tuesday until the 17th, except for election day. We took the day off then because we thought that there'd be too much distraction. So we're going to go through until November 17th. So
And we can still sign up for those because we want to sign up for the next few classes too. Okay.
yep, you can sign up for all of them. For the incentive though, it's going to be a one-time per series, one household, one series. So you can't get like $300 worth.
All your classes are going to be very informative. It's like I know where I'm going to be every Tuesday for the next few weeks.
Yeah, good.
Excellent. We would love to see everybody there.
Definitely. All right.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I guess we'll see you next Tuesday.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks so
Donovan.
much.
Katie.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.